here with us today. Sorry, I forgot to cue that. Thank you for that. So today, this is our journal editors panel, Meditative Inquiry and Holistic and Alternative Education Theories and Practices. And I will just go ahead and introduce our speakers today. Firstly, we have Dr. Laurel Tien, who is a holistic educator who has worked at the California Institute for Integral Studies and completed her dissertation in transformative educational studies. She is also co-editor of the Holistic Education Review. Dr. Paul Freedman is the coordinating editor of the Holistic Educator Review. He is also the founding head of Salmonberry School on Orcas Island in Washington, among other accolades, such as serving as president for the Graduate Institute for Transformative Learning. The title of their session will be Meditative Inquiry and Holistic Education, Resonant Practices. Following this, we have Dr. Helen Lees, who is founding editor of Other Education, the Journal of Alternative Education, and has recently published Playing the University Game, The Art of University-Based Self-Education. The title of her session today will be A Talent for Meditative Inquiry Through Alternative Education Concepts. And following this, we will have Dr. Teresa Strong-Wilson. Dr. Teresa Strong-Wilson is Associate Professor in the Faculty of Education at McGill University and Editor-in-Chief of the McGill Journal of Education. Her most recent publication is called Teachers' Ethical Self-Encounters with Counter Stories in the Classroom, from Implicated to Concerned Subjects. And the title of this session will be Touching Interiority, Given Time and Space, a Journal Editor's Perspective. And then Dr. Carlo Ricci is a full professor at the Schulich School of Education at Nipissing University in Graduate Studies. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Education. And the title of his session will be The Connections I Make Between Self-Determined Learning and Ashwani's 7 Key Principles of Meditative Inquiry. Thank you so much to all. And I will spotlight Dr. Freedman for our meditation.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Ashwani. Thanks to everyone for coming. We always say it's an honor to attend such events and sessions, but what an honor. It's truly an honor. I had prepared a loving kindness meditation, which was quite similar to one we had done earlier today, so switched it up. This is from the late Thich Nhat Hanh and his book, The Heart of Buddha's Teaching. It's a meditation poem on breathing. It invites you to join me in some breath. So be comfortable. Rest your eyes, close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Take a couple of breaths. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. After saying these sentences, we can abbreviate them by saying in, as we breathe in, and out as we breathe out. We don't try to control our breathing, whether our in-breath is long or short, deep or shallow. We just breathe naturally and shine the light of mindfulness on it. In, out. In, out. And continue. When we do this, we notice that in fact our breathing becomes slower and deeper naturally. Breathing in, my in-breath has become deep. Breathing out, my out-breath has become slow. Deep, slow. deep, slow, and continue. You will notice that you have become calmer and more at ease. Breathing in, I feel calm. Breathing out, I feel at ease. I am not struggling anymore. Calm. Ease. Calm. Ease. Continue. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I release all my worries and anxieties. Smile. Release. Smile. Release. Continue. And lastly, breathing in, I dwell deeply in the present moment. Breathing out, I know this is a wonderful moment. Present moment. Wonderful moment. Present moment. Wonderful moment. And continue. Nothing is more precious than being in the present moment, fully alive and aware. As you're ready, you can come back to your body and gently to this conference.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. I'm just going to add Dr. Laurel Tien and hand it over to you two. And I'll just note, I'll try and give you a 3-minute warning towards the end of your time, just so we can keep to the program today. As well, for the viewers, I'll just mention that we will open up the chat for a question and answer period at the end. So just save your questions and please feel free to add them after the session, the panel has, the speakers have ended. Yeah.
Thank you. Laurel, hi, my partner in crime.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for that, Paul. And, thank you, Ashwani, and everyone who's, organized this amazing dialogue, as well as is present here for conversation. I think the first thing that Paul and I wanted to do was just to deepen into our intros a little bit more, just to be able to just provide more of a grounding and a positionality for where we're each coming from. I wanted to just to add to the intro that I come to you from south of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, in the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. The roles that I'm coming with in relation to this conference is as a faculty member at Antioch University and the former Self-Design Graduate Institute, where being involved in a master's program that's about individualizing. education and also being in a learning community, which I think really ties into this notion of this dialogic education that has been discussed at the conference so far. I also completed my doctorate at the California Institute of Integral Studies using a methodology called that I call generative listening or contemplative listening, which is obviously very resonant with meditative inquiry and has many of the same roots. So looking at this idea of a post-traditional radical approach to learning community at the higher education level. So I'll pass over to Paul if he wants to add to his intro as well.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I've been at this conference since 5 this morning, my time, which, gratitude to Laurel. I had marked my calendar as in the times indicated on the conference program, only to remember, thanks Laurel, that I'm 5 hours behind. So I was going to be 4 hours behind. I was going to be 4 hours late to this session. So anyway, here I am, still have my coffee. In addition to the way I was introduced, I will just add, I'm a parent first, so parent of two children. My kids have taught me more about holistic education than any of my scholarly mentors, though I've learned much from them as well. I also am in the waters of the Salish Sea, former lands of the Coast Salish people. And Laurel and I live very close together and never see each other. And it's only gotten harder to travel from one to the other. Yeah, I've been on the kind of journey through holistic education for 20 years or so. I co-founded a small elementary school. I'm a classroom teacher by training, and I'm have been intellectually curious. I also have to correct my introduction as Dr. Freedman to be soon, one day, Dr. Freedman. I'm in my doctoral studies now, and I will finish sometime.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We wanted to spend a little bit of time talking a bit about the Holistic Education Review Journal, a bit about the history, our advisory committee, and so Paul's going to start off with that piece, and then I'm going to talk about the mission and how that comes out in the journal itself as the production editor. So I'll pass back to you, Paul.
Great. So the Holistic Education Review, some of you who have been around a while may recall, was founded in 1988 by Dr. Ron Miller and some colleagues. It was an ambitious project and launched as a peer-reviewed journal in an emerging field. It was, although historical antecedents certainly existed, people were not talking about holistic education in academia until both Jack Miller published his book on the holistic curriculum and Ron Miller was publishing the journal. So that journal continued as a print, as everything was then, quarterly journal. For a number of years. Eventually, Ron handed it over to a new editor, Bill Crane, Dr. William Crane, who was at CCNY at the time in New York, and the new editorial team changed the name of the journal to Encounter: Education for Meaning and Social Justice. It continued as Encounter for another number of years, transitioned to a dual platform where there was a print component where abstracts were published in a little CD-ROM that, the journey we've all been on with technology. Anyway, they eventually tried to transition to a digital format and ended up folding. We, new editorial team, and there are other members of the team too, were invited to consider taking on another little news publication that was helping the holistic educators in the field at the time. It was called The Holistic Educator, and they were publishing twice a year. And we talked to each other, talked to our friends, and decided it might be time to actually bring back a more scholarly, peer-reviewed component to this community coalescing journal. So we checked with original founders and got blessings and permission and gratitude, and we have relaunched the Holistic Education Review. We have now published 4 issues, I think, and we're currently publishing twice a year. We'll provide links and things like that. Maybe we'll drop them in the chat. Really, really proud of what we're doing, and constantly, unpacking and critically analyzing what we're doing. As came up this morning, we'll have some threads we bring forth from that conversation too. To you, Laurel.
Yeah, obvious. Thank you so much, Paul. It's just such a real honor to be group, in partnership, as Paul mentioned, with our co-editors, as well as our really amazing advisory board, and really intentionally inviting different individuals and ways of knowing to the dialogue. We're also in partnership with Southern Oregon University, the Transformative Learning Foundation, Antioch University, and the TIES program, which is currently run through Union University. But I wanted to, my part in terms of the production editor piece, that just to quickly talk about our mission and how we try to operationalize that, or we aim to operationalize that. So our mission of the Holistic Education Review is to enhance and broaden the scholarship of holistic education, to lift up diverse and emerging voices of holistic education practice, and to connect the holistic education community. In a few moments, we're going to be talking a bit about how we're defining holistic education and how that really resonates with meditative inquiry, but also a part of our statement of purpose. And this relates back to some of the conversations that were happening in the previous some of the conversations this morning, is about we envision our Holistic Education Review as a force for decolonization and equity in education, and for broadening the umbrella of holistic education to include streams of social emotional learning, mindfulness, project-based learning, environmental education, and other aspects of education that honor the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. So the way that this plays out is, as I was really excited to hear the dialogue about intentionality, and I think that was Dr. Lisa who was speaking about that, Merriweather, as well as Dr. Kent, who were speaking about this idea of being messy and intentional, and reaching out to different voices. And also this idea of doing peer review in a different way, a more holistic way. So this idea also of multiple ways of knowing. We have intentionally used an open source journal platform space. So yeah, we can put the URL in the chat later, but it's HER at blah blah blah. So it's a longish kind of a thing. But this we have intentionally incorporated peer review, as well as more community voices and invited articles and a variety of different threads in the journal itself, to be able to work with a variety of ways of knowing and still have an intentional peer review process, but really trying to challenge and and notice the typical kind of academic privileging that's happened in education. So a big part of that. I think that was all I was going to say about those pieces. So I'll pass it back to you, Paul.
Thanks. Yeah, so just briefly to help define our understanding of holistic education, and allow us to connect it to meditative inquiry more explicitly. When asked to define holistic education earlier in my journey, it would take me a long time and I would be full of citations and references and, you know, philosophical lineage and antecedents and anyway, how's this? It's a pedagogy of connectedness, for four realms of connection: connecting to self, body, mind, spirit; connecting to other on a personal dialogic level, as well as a community level, as well as understanding and feeling connection to distant others; connecting to nature, the earth, one's place, and having an ecological sensibility in one's pedagogy; and connecting to spirit, sense of something larger, sense of wonder and awe. So a pedagogy of connectedness: self, other, earth, spirit. And in Dr. Kumar's book that we're all gathered to reflect upon, he writes, "May our meditative inquiry transform ourselves, our relationships, and the world." That's another way of saying, at least to me, the way I take it is, you know, it's a practice of connection. It's very analogous to my understanding of holistic pedagogy. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure, in the session, but Ashwani serves on our journal's advisory board. I'm so honored to have his presence there. It feels like a very natural alignment.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
Just add that you're at your 3 minutes.
Awesome. That is perfect. We've actually done it, Paul. We've kept it on track here. So I just wanted to add about the idea of meditative inquiry resonances with holistic education and the Her journal. And I wanted to quote some stuff from that Dr. Ashwani writes in the introduction, that meditative inquiry is a holistic engagement that brings together our bodies, minds, hearts, and beings in the process of teaching, learning, researching, creating, and living. And really, that based on this idea of 4 key principles: that human consciousness is in conflict, that education reflects and perpetuates the characteristic features of human consciousness. Meditative inquiry is an existential approach to comprehend and transform human consciousness, and that really understanding curriculum and research, I would add, is meditative inquiry is a way to provide self-transformative educational experiences to students and their teachers. And as a way of summarizing and pulling together our threads, that really the idea of meditative inquiry as a research methodology and a teaching methodology that aligns well with holistic education. And the journal is really proud that we will be publishing the proceedings from this conference, and just really honored to be, again, part of this energy, bringing this dialogue forward. And I'll pass over to Paul for his closing comments.
Yeah, and I would just say to our fellow panelists for this session, it's so lovely to be in community with you. I hope we have a little bit of time for interaction and dialogue as you know, towards the end of our session, but also I really invite continued collaboration, partnership, and just kinship with you all and others at this conference. So yes, we accept manuscript submissions, check out the journal, and I won't do the full advertisement. I think we'll turn it over to the next speakers.
Thank you so much. There was so much there that resonated with me as a teacher, so I'm sure others had a similar experience, and we will bring you back in for the Q&A at the end. Thank you again. So I will just pass it over to Dr. Lees and fix our screen here.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Okay. I think it sounds like a little bit of background to the journal would be appropriate. Shall I do that just very briefly?
Yes, please.
Okay. And by the way, I must say it is very nice to be with other journal editors in this area, because it's a lonely job. It's for me, it's got less lonely since a co-editor joined, which is Dr. Gina Riley, or Professor Gina Riley. I don't know how it works in America. And so between us all together, we're having a lot of fun now. But running a journal which is at the, how should I put this? Cutting edge sounds a bit pompous, which is trying to challenge a dominant paradigm in education is difficult. And listening today, it strikes me that there's something to be said about the tensions involved in this kind of work of epistemological and ontological kinds. So just very briefly to move into that space. When I started Other Education in 2012, I had a different co-editor back then. I was publishing my first book came out, which was called Silence in Schools, and I was deeply involved in this kind of area of meditative inquiry, obviously with different language attached to it. Through that work, you know, the silence as a concept touches on mindfulness, it touches on meditation, it touches on questioning philosophically and otherwise, or not questioning. And so that was part of the birth of the journal in terms of what alternative education is and should be, and what it can offer and bring to the world. And then the more that you do this kind of work, and at the time I was in an academic career, or on an academic career ladder, and so you encounter the violences of the university in every way that the university is epistemologically and ontologically violent. And you're attempting to be holistically engaged with such violence. It doesn't kind of wash really. It's a tricky tension. So to hold space, I think that's a therapeutic phrase, to hold space for the holistic, the meditative, the inquiry of a paradigmatically different kind from that of the violent university is personally taxing. And so when Gina came on board recently, I was glad, because I was thinking of folding everything. But the thing is, and this is the power, if you like, of this kind of inquiry, this kind of approach to education, when you invest energy, time and energy, personal sacrifice in forwarding and developing the sorts of knowledge that we're talking about, it does have effects. And the thing that made a huge difference for me in terms of the ambition of Other Education, brackets.org, in case you want to look at it, in terms of it having meaning rather than just being a slog, was Gina told me that there was some, well, she told me a few stories, but because they were saying, no, you can't let this go. And I was thinking, I really want to, it's a lot of work. she said that there was a court case where there was a mother who wanted to educate her children differently, and that probably means outside of schools, violent schools, schooling as violence, with reference to Clive Harper's work. And the judge said, there was a judge and he was deciding who was going to have custody of the children, the mother who wanted to educate differently, or probably the father, or whoever she was partnered to. I don't mean to be heteronormative there, by the way, sorry for that, but I just don't know the details of the case. Anyway, so the judge said, well, look, I can take this mother's interest in a kind of education which has got all of this inquiry stuff in it. I can take it seriously if you can tell me if there's an academic journal in this field. And somebody said, yes, there is. It's called Other Education. And based on that, the judge started to take it seriously. And eventually the children were allowed to stay with the mother. And so I thought, oh, well, in this case, what all of this tension, this struggle, and I don't think any of us here in this conference can underestimate the struggle of the kinds of knowledge that we're dealing with, the struggle that we have to hold space for them in the face of the epistemology and ontology of capitalism, of competition, of a brutal scientism that says that meditative approaches are just a wacky paradigm way too far from the truth. That is really difficult work. And so that's my introduction to the journal. The journal has been in that space since 2012, trying to hold its ground, trying to be strong, and trying to do something. I think it seems that it has. So I'm happy to be with it. And so what I want to talk about is the idea of talent is fostered through the concepts that other education as this space for the alternative, representing another paradigm that it attempts. And sorry, I've just got a bit distracted because here in Italy there are mosquitoes. Maybe I'm not alone. Maybe some of you have got mosquitoes. They hurt. They bite out. So talent would be that, first of all, you can be yourself. You're allowed to develop yourself, and an education which does not coerce you to be in a certain model, with reference to the word violence used before, is the kind of education where you can have the freedom to create and think. You can enjoy connectedness with others without feeling that you have to perform, that you have to be like them, or you can't be who you are, and so on. And you can take care of yourself, and nobody's going to try and stop you doing that because they have an agenda for what you should be doing and should say, etc. So a kind of education which allows someone to be themselves is a kind of education, for me, that is a fundamental premise of any meditative inquiry approach or attempt or paradigm. You know, education is fundamental. A certain kind of education is fundamental to meditative inquiry being fruitful, but also being respected. It can be squashed very easily, and this is something that I've encountered and worked with my research, with the journal, and with work that I'm doing now, where I'm editing a magazine for something called Internal Family Systems, which is a highly therapeutic approach to resolving trauma, resolving, frankly, the problems that everyone has because they're human and life isn't perfect. So there have to be conditions for meditative inquiry, and in such conditions, talent can emerge, such that if someone feels free, if they feel at ease, if they feel like they can be themselves, then they can start to ask questions in a certain way and of a certain kind, both about themselves but also about the world that they live in. And think validation is a very important part of that. So a community of inquiry such that alternative education done in a democratic way, where consent is privileged, is something which is very, very precious. Now, I just want to ask if anybody has got, well, I think you said that the questions are coming at the end, but I'm sort of...
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, I think, how long have I been speaking? Because, you know, when you start talking, you lose track of time. Can I check in with you?
You're muted. Ali, you're muted.
So sorry. You have roughly 5 minutes left.
Okay, right. Well, going back to the talent. So in my abstract, I wrote something which puzzled me, and I do want to just pay a little bit of attention to it, where I wrote to aid children. It is the philosophy of the online open access journal Other Education to aid children and adults with meditative inquiry, which is very much true. Although we don't use that phrase, that's a new phrase, but it's a sort of, it's almost as though the phrase is required, but in order to talk about it, whereas people would be talking about it and wondering what phrase to use. By introducing us to and developing the concepts of alternative education. And that works in both directions, in that the journal is there to help people with such inquiry of their own making, obviously. It's not something which would be forced or pushed upon them at all. Let's call it our natural birthright to be inquirers. And if we're in a good state of mind, we're hopefully fairly meditative. So the journal would, in everything that it does, desire that people be prone to talented, well, the talent comes after, prone to, given the right conditions for meditative inquiry. But the key thing there to do with the concepts of alternative education is that when people are there, then they can allow themselves to be open to the concepts of alternative education, which, for instance, that you don't coerce children, that you create modes by which democratic agreements can be reached. So call it equality and fairness in some senses. These are not common concepts in the world that we have. And so if you have an education which allows people to be tending towards meditative inquiry desires, then what you do is you're also pushing them into the concepts of alternative education, which because they've got open hearts. Let me just roughly carve that out. It's a bit more complicated than that, but you know, they've got open hearts towards new concepts, new ideas, new ways of being, and also of becoming, not just of themselves if they're adults, but of the becoming of their children, such that their children don't have to copy their own pattern as adults, which would probably, given the way that the world is, include the adult's own trauma, brackets, because they haven't had the opportunity and the privilege in terms of money to engage with a therapeutic journey. So that is a sort of it's like a package, but it's the word holistic. Okay, it's a circular package. It's a chicken and egg as well, in that you need conditions in order to have talent to think otherwise and to allow an education of another kind to be in your life. But you also need some predispositions, shall we say, which usually, I mean, in my PhD, I linked it to Kuhn, which is that people get very upset and tired and wondering, with an O, about other ways, because they see the anomalies and the crisis points in the paradigm that they're currently in. And so they're seeking, and that predisposes them to asking in a new way towards new ideas, new concepts. So other education is a journal that allows itself to be open to people who want to say things in a voice that is full of meditative inquiry. It doesn't have anything else. But I would add, just as one last point, and then I'll finish. Recently, because of climate change and because of my own increasing interest in therapeutic agendas, which I do not see as any bad agenda, therapeutic agendas for all, other education has started to desire, as a journal, to be much more interested in the zone, the area of meditative inquiry, as it links to those things which are of the spiritual, shall we say. I was always very much interested in the spiritual, but now the spiritual is linked to education through other educations, eye of the needle, as something which is entirely practical. And that is its therapeutic voice at this point.
Perfect. You were spot on for time. Thank you so much. Great thoughts there. Thank you for sharing, and we'll bring you back for the Q&A. Okay. The next speaker is Carlo Ricci. And I've already introduced you, Dr. Ricci, if you'd like to turn your camera on. Perfect.
Yeah.
And then I'll just hand it over to you, and I'll give you a 3-minute warning when you get close to your time.
Okay, and it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes?
15.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm in a hotel room, as you can see, bringing my daughter to her medical school, and it's in a nice environment because I got a tan, probably wasn't as careful as I should have been, but thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and talk to all of you about what I'm interested in and the connections that I've made. So I'm interested in something called unschooling, critical pedagogy, and holistic education. And of course, when I'm speaking now, I'm speaking for myself only. And the connections that I'm going to be making between my work and Ashwani's work, that's, as Krishnamurti would say, that's my interpretation of it, right? So I'm not speaking for Ashwani, but I'm just saying this is how I've made these particular types of connections. And for this particular talk, I'm going to focus on the unschooling aspect of my interests. So what I'm going to try to do is, in the introduction to the 2022 book that Ashwani wrote, and edited, his introductory chapter on Roman numeral page 24, in the book, as you know, is engaging with meditative inquiry in teaching, learning, and research. He talks about 7 key principles of meditative inquiry. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to make connections between those 7 key principles and unschooling as I see it from my interpretation. So the first principle that Ashwani talks about as the 7 key principles is he talks about questioning deeply about everything without fear. And of course, that's something that is extremely important to an unschooling environment as well. So as a way to try to make it clearer, in contrast to mainstream schooling, for example, where students are told what is allowed to be questioned, willed learners or unschoolers or self-determined learners or life learners, these are all similar terms for similar concepts. They have the freedom to ask and seek answers to whatever questions they choose. And so unschoolers is a branch of homeschooling, as many of you know, And essentially what unschoolers try to do is they try to have freedom in deciding what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, for how long, whether to opt in or opt out. So the learner becomes empowered. So it's not up to the teacher, or the principal, or the school board, or the state, or it's up to the learner. And the learner gets to make these types of decisions about those types of things. And so they don't have to fear that there's some type of an authority figure there that will impose things on them, or say, you're not allowed to speak about that at this moment, or we're focusing on this subject, not that subject. So everything is up for questioning from an unschooling perspective. So there's a definite, Ashwani's first point, unschooling itself. So I'm trying to be conscious of time. So Ashwani's second point that he talks about is critiquing social. This is very interesting because sometimes people criticize unschooling and they would say, well, as an unschooler, there's no explicit curriculum that is imposed on the young people that focuses on social justice, oppression, and discrimination. But I think that's not the correct way of looking at unschooling, right? Unschooling is democratic. So when you look at curriculum, there's all kinds of different types of curriculum, as you know. There's the learned curriculum, there's the taught curriculum, there's also the lived curriculum. And unschooling is clearly part of the lived curriculum. So the best way to teach about social justice and oppression and discrimination is to allow people to live in such a way that social justice is the core of their life experiences, that they are not being oppressed and they are not being discriminated. And by living that truth in a very democratic way, in a very positive way, I think people naturally then become more understanding and appreciative of social justice, oppression, and discrimination. So, there's also the hidden curriculum, as opposed to the taught curriculum. And within unschooling, self-determined learning, willed learning, life learning, there is that sense of living in such a way that you are embracing social justice, non-oppressive environments, and not being discriminated against, and you embody that, right? And I think mainstream school, you could see in so many ways, democracy is under attack in all kinds of different places, Canada, the US, around the world. And in part, I think it's because we're talking democracy, but we're not living democracy. And so there's, in my mind, a definite connection between unschooling, willed learning, WILLED, willed learning, and social justice, oppression, and discrimination, which is Ashwani's second point. So by living it, it makes a huge difference. The third point that Ashwani talks about as his 7 principles, 7 key principles of meditative inquiry, is celebrating the freedom to think, to observe, to express, and to be. And from what I've already said, you could probably see the connection between willed learners, and they're free, and thereby they can think and observe and express and be however they desired. So willed learners, as I mentioned before, they can decide what to learn, when to learn, how to learn, where to learn, why to learn, and be. So again, very consistent with Ashwani's third point of meditative principles. The fourth he talks about is cultivating awareness of the ways one thinks, feels, and acts. And since will learners, they get to self-determine their own curriculum and life journey. They become aware of themselves and how they think, how they feel, and how they act, which again is very consistent with my interpretation of what Ashwani is saying. So to make this point clearer, in a mainstream school, learners are told what, when, how, where, and why they need to learn one thing or another. Therefore, they're less likely to be aware of themselves since they're being directed and controlled by external beings. If they would like to explore their artistic, athletic, scientific side, and at any point, an unschooler has the freedom to do so. So they're not limited to, this is currently math class, this is, so they could unfold in ways that seem authentic and natural, which is very consistent with what Ashwani is talking about here, cultivating awareness of the ways one thinks, feels, and acts. You become very aware when you are in charge of your own being, your own learning, your own life. A mainstream schooler cannot easily cultivate the ways they think, feel, and act, but an unschooler can. And you often hear mainstream schoolers lament that they're going to respond based on what they believe the teacher wants to hear, rather than what they believe. So this is limiting in so many ways. Not knowing people's true thoughts means that we don't know what is in their hearts. And that makes it tough to challenge and even support people's positions where appropriate. So if somebody is holding an idea that's against what we believe to be socially just, and they're just going to try to figure out what the teacher says and hide what's in their heart, that is limiting in so many ways. And I think all of us lose out because of this. And of course, mainstream schoolers can do all of this as well, but not as easily and not without the same support as unschoolers can. Mainstream schoolers would need to resist and sneak around because, they're being marked and judged and controlled in ways that unschoolers are not. So again, Ashwani's fourth principle of cultivating awareness of the ways one thinks, feels, and acts is very consistent with unschooling. Number 5, Ashwani talks about partaking and rejoicing in the creative flow of life. And of course, will learners can rejoice in the creative flow of life because they learn and live on their own schedule. If they're engaged in an activity and want to keep doing it because they are in a state of flow, they can. No one is going to ring a bell and force them to stop and move on to something else. Similarly, if they want to move on to something else, they can, since there is no external authority or compulsion telling them to move on to something else or to stay on task. Will learners can go with the flow as they so choose, which is consistent with Ashwani's 5th principle. The 6th is understanding relationships and connecting with people and nature deeply. And will learners can connect with people of all ages and demographics. They are free to connect with anyone, anytime. They can talk and engage in any way that they wish. Again, contrasting it with mainstream schooling, where so many young people spend so much time, can make the point clearer. So in mainstream schools, young people are often in the same age cohorts. They are controlled with when they can connect with others. Will learners are free. Similarly, will learners can stay indoors if they so choose, but they can also move between places and spaces as they desire. So if they want to connect with nature, they can. They can go out anytime they wish. Their bodies are not being controlled or constrained. And the final principle that Ashwani talks about, number 7, participating in dialogue with oneself and others honestly and authentically. And again, a will learner can be honest with themselves. They can self-determine what, when, where, why, how they want to be. They can be authentic. They can honestly and authentically unfold in ways that make sense to themselves. They don't have to follow other people's agendas, but can honestly and authentically choose their own way of being. And again, that's they can participate in dialogue with oneself and others honestly and authentically. And just to come back, because I think my time is almost up.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Again, just to make the point, there's the taught curriculum, the learned curriculum, the explicit curriculum, and so on, as well as the hidden curriculum and the lived curriculum. And unschooling is about living democratically and honestly. And so if you think about the lived curriculum, that is unschooling, right? It's about what Wendy Presnitz calls life learning. And John Holt says, learning is living. And as you live life, you learn things. And so it's a very authentic, genuine way of being and unfolding that I think is very consistent with the principles that Ashwani has shared with us in that particular context. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much. I hope you found that worthwhile.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure we'll have some questions at the end. So we'll bring you back for the Q&A in a minute. And thank you. I'm just going to bring in Dr. Teresa Strong-Wilson.
Hi, well, thank you for inviting me to speak and be part of this editors panel. And I think I might be the outlier, being a generalist journal in education. Well, not on any of the particular subjects that have been named here, and also, but also in the sense of being perhaps among the mainstream in this group. But I'm going to complicate that somewhat as the occasion of this talk, to thinking about the journal from the perspective of Ashwani Kumar's work in meditative inquiry. We're actually quite an eclectic journal. We've been around for a long time. We have been around for 56 years, the McGill Journal of Education. And we are presently an open access journal, online journal, but that only started in 2007. We are also bilingual, English, French. So that's been an essential part of our identity, being situated too in Quebec. And then also in McGill, which presents, certain tensions and contradictions to McGill also being a bastion of English education. So we presently have 9 editors, almost half of whom are French from other universities in Quebec. So that's been really important to us. We also have emerging scholars and teachers on as our editors, and so that's part of our identity as a journal. We publish 3 times a year, 2 general issues and 1 special issue. So that kind of gives you a context for the journal. I'm going to share my screen now and share some slides just to keep me on track here. And also, as you'll see, because I want to show you some pictures. So I don't know, I don't think I need to go through this. Everybody knows this. Just to reiterate that the work of a journal editor involves all these things. And clearly we've heard the other journals have been opening spaces for thinking and dialogue. That's been their explicit aim. We try to do that within the compass of what we do as a journal. We provide a space for peer review. Of course, that's really important, especially to new scholars. But we also consider as the probable reception of the work that comes in to our readers who are general, right? But then we do have a kind of a sense of what we have published in the past and who tends to read our journal. And therefore, with any journal, there's a certain amount of gatekeeping that goes on in terms of what kinds of things get talked about. And of course, that can, like I would suggest in this thinking about and participating in this conference, that we need to include more along the lines of what we've been talking about here in this conference, and that the other journals do with respect to meditation, holistic education, and so on. This is our mission statement, our mandate, and so thoughtful and critical submissions, scholars and practitioners do encourage a wide range of submissions, from formal, non-formal, informal, incidental contexts of education. So really everything, community, popular education. There is a wide range there that we consider. And that's quite deliberate. I'm part of the editorial team that started in 2011. We were, and we deliberately made that change our scope and mandate to be that expansive. So as a first read, as a journal editor, I would ask, or any one of the number of journal editors with whom I work would ask, is this a good fit for the journal? So, quality, is it clear? Is it well organized and so on? But beyond that, thinking about meditative inquiry, I want to know, even myself as a journal editor, reading the piece for the first time, what is it? What is this approach? What distinguishes it from other approaches in the field, including mindfulness, teacher reflection, and so on? What will be its likely contribution to the various readers who read our journals, from the teachers to students to scholars, researchers, and so on? And what difference does it hope to make? And if I think about my own understanding of meditative inquiry, because this is a term that's new to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to think about it. I look at the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, and meditative is a disposition to being to practicing or engaging in meditation. And so then what's meditation? It's there's definitely a sense there of something that happens over time. It's sustained, it's continuous, serious contemplation. So it's not simply something that happens momentarily. It's something that often becomes a practice, a form of action, as we've heard. And then of course I am familiar with, but again, only by hearsay, mainly Buddhism, yoga, and so on, other ways of practicing meditation, where, and two, familiar again only by hearsay of those practices as evolving to certain eradication, as the OED puts it, of worldly mental activity. So a certain kind of withdrawal or entry into a different kind of space. And then of course, meditation can mean a collection of writings on this subject, which is what I read when I read this book. When I think about myself, and if I was to think about how I might practice meditative inquiry in the absence of having embraced that practice explicitly, I would say it would be writing. Right? Writing, to me, writing opens a space for what I've read and heard about is meditative inquiry. And then in the context of work that I do, which is social justice and work with teachers, autobiographical nature, also focused on interiority. And following McKay and Quay, one of the chapters in the book, I am interested in following the movement of thought. And they talk about without the interference of the I. And I would be interested in that as teachers and their students respond to counter stories in education, counter stories being stories that haven't previously been encountered or are not often encountered in schools with respect to subjects like residential school and so on. And one way in which I've been working with that is to have teachers work with the subject more than the I. And so we do autobiographical work, but I also encourage them to work with the subject that pulls them into this, in other words, here, the concern with social justice, in particular, let's say with residential schooling. And then we focus on that. But I still get stuck on this notion or this word interference, as I don't necessarily see the I as interfering. And so, of course, we do have book reviews. We publish book reviews in the MJE. And so I decided to frame this as a way of thinking about, okay, if I was going to write a book review for the MJE on this book, I need to grapple with the ideas in the book and to present them to other readers who would then be interested to read the book. So how would I do that? And the process, I also tried to imagine how different MJE readers might respond. And so, like several of you, I pulled out different quotes. Ashwani Kumar explains, this is from Pinar's Forward, that meditative inquiry is the art of understanding oneself and one's relationship to people in the world, asking fundamental questions about the meaning, origin, and purpose of life. And I think those kind of questions are not ones that we generally encounter in the journal, but that readers would be interested to encounter. I note Keinar, he himself is interested in silence, so he picks up on the emphasis on silence in Kumar's work. And again, that might be something that would be of interest to readers. Podolsky notes that, and he's one of the ones who did the illustrations for the book, and I'm going to come back to that later, the role of the illustrations in the book in terms of meditative inquiry. But he talks about, and I think this is a refrain, I know I myself could say it about myself, but it seems to be a refrain across the chapters, several of them, that they only heard about meditative inquiry recently or when they encountered Ashwani Kumar, but that they said they have been engaged in it or some version of it for a very long time. So again, I think that's something about the approach that's quite interesting, and what more can be said about that? In what ways have we been engaged in it for a long time? And also, he also draws attention to the importance of silence. I think I alluded to the fact that we have emerging scholars as part of our editorial team. And of course, these are often authors who submit. And so we do have some pieces in our journal that offer advice or some form of mentorship to graduate students on how to publish or how to write. And so Ashwani too has offered suggestions, Akara notes on how to slow down and be aware of their internal turmoil. Don't fight it, don't run from it, but give attention to it and importance to those things that I truly enjoy. And so I think that too is something that's really important, and again would find a strong resonance in readers to the journal, given increasingly the importance of wellness within doctoral studies and university studies generally. This point was already brought up earlier in this panel. Kumar's noting that how can social change be really possible if individuals themselves are in conflict and disorder? And I think that's a perspective that isn't often brought. We do have a lot of people who are interested in reading as well as interested in submitting pieces related to social justice education. And so I think that perspective is really important and needed. And two, just as a method. And so questions about how it works would be of interest to MGU readers, how it's a process of clearing blockages and breaking down conditioning, breaking down fear, as was said previously, too, so that life will rush out or rush in. And then two, and keeping with social justice education, shifting the focus away from maybe exclusively on changing structures. We do tend to have quite a few pieces that do that, but on changing how we think ourselves. We do have a lot of pieces that are either from teachers or work with teachers or on teaching. And so, teachers read our journal. So the meditative mind begins by asking yourself as a teacher serious, meaningful questions and giving yourself time and space. And that's something that teachers don't often have. And so how can our journal contribute to do that more? And then, as I said previously, just helping readers understand the link between different approaches, meditative inquiry, I'm here, mindfulness, as participating in forms of direct perception, being fully present, just being, as we had an opportunity to do just in the opening with the breathing. So if I look back into the journal, we have had some, and I just did a very cursory look. I'm sure if I looked more deeply, I could find, like if I looked for words like holistic or unschooling, I might find more pieces, but these are two that I found, one by Kite, the other by Stewart and Alroots on sustaining the sense of self in teaching, or on contemplation activities and service learning and what that difference that make. But probably the most interesting piece I came across, and it goes back to 1984, was this one by Clifford Papke, who was a professor, as you can see from the bottom here. He was an associate professor at the time in the faculty. And this is all that this piece is, meditation. It's a drawing, it's a picture of a woodland scene. There is no text. And so this is offered as a contribution first and foremost, and then it's also a standalone as a visual, which we which we haven't had of late in the journal.
I'll just mention you're at your 3 minutes.
Okay. So in terms of thinking about how might meditative inquiry look like in the journal, more in the MGE, someone could do a special issue on the subject or on a related subject, like on schooling, holistic education, and so on. We could have a forum, a conversation, dialogue about different kinds of practices. But I guess I want to use my minutes to pause over this possibility of these interludes, because as I said, we are an eclectic journal and we have changed quite a bit and done different things over the years. So for instance, William Talley, who was an editor of the MG during the 1980s, used to separate his editorial from the, like the resumes, summaries of the articles, and just offer his own thoughts. Like here, saying, as editor, I subscribe to the idea that some intellectual equilibrium is necessary. So encouraging readers themselves to, and future writers to stop and think, and then just putting these pictures alongside his editorial, sometimes, often without explanation. They were just juxtaposed there to give, in similar way to how they've been done in the book with Podolsky's pictures. And here's another one, John Harley, who preceded him, Talley, who also did the same and included pictures, and then also again used the editorial as a place to invite here. Writers for the MG are asked to note that in articles within these covers, we ask them to talk in the language of life. And so thinking about what editors and editorials can do in terms of encouraging kinds of things in the journal and how things are written and approached. We do have presently an artistic and creative inquiries section, which we just started based on a creative pedagogy special issue we just published. And as you can see, the main thrust of it is to, as I bolded here, to offer a means of expanding the form and function of arts-based and creative research. But I'm thinking we should revise that and include something that encourages meditative reflections along those lines. And in conclusion, then, I'm taking my cue from Raja Bali and a beautiful image that he included with his piece in the creative pedagogy issue. That what we need to do as a journalist, think about more about how we can open those silent wings to touch interiority in our journal. Thank you.
That's a lovely way to finish. So thank you so much for that. And I will just bring you all in as a panel again, and we'll open up the chat. So for the viewers, please feel free to post your questions and we will try and offer them up to the panel.
And maybe I'll just speak while we're waiting for the thoughtful questions to pour in. I'll take advantage of my privilege as a panelist to say, I have a question.
Just 1 minute, Paul. Just one quick minute.
Yep.
Carlo, can you share your video so that we can spotlight you?
Perfect. Okay. Am I missing anything?
Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Laurel.
Yeah, bring Laurel in, would you? She's
I'll get her.
She's there too. Yeah, so here I am practicing this journal editor thing without, as I tend to do, without any real study preparation or training, but because it was something that I felt needed to happen. So right, I leapt in. And I'm feeling pretty good about my work. Like, I think it's important. We're doing, as some of you described, providing space for emerging scholarship. And I'm loving the content of what we're producing. And at the same time, as often happens in my work, I'm led to think critically about the bigger picture of what we're doing. And particularly this morning, I don't know if you all were there for Kent's comments that maybe what full professors could be doing in their university settings is to stop publishing and that maybe, as we all are in so many ways, complicit in all the institutions of oppression that we write about and critique and deconstruct and so on. But here we are doing this work. And I just feel and have felt in the role of journal editor, this tension between, as Teresa just said, like that role of gatekeeper being one of the things the journal is doing, as well as opening space as another thing the journal is doing. And that tension, and I'd love some help from my colleagues. How do we feel good about that? How do we feel okay about, thinking change agent thoughts and somehow reifying at the same time this thing of publishing as a mark of legitimacy? I don't know if I'm saying that well, but I'll just pause and see if there's thoughts about that, and then we can let our chat enter.
I could share something if it's appropriate.
Please.
Please
So,
go ahead.
I think as editor, we have a lot of power, and it depends how you follow through with the peer review process, right? So often, if I get something, it's not in a traditional sense, reject, accept, but can we work with the author and try to figure out between the peer reviewer eventually and the author to sort of create a piece that will satisfy the needs of the author and the needs of the peer reviewer as well, to try to do it in a more loving way, in a more trusting way, in a more respectful way, rather than just doing it in the cold scientific sense of yes or no. So with the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning, as much as possible, I try to constantly have that view in mind where it becomes a process. And if the author is willing to engage, then let's try to get those ideas out as much as we can. And I know some of the things that give me great satisfaction from my journal, it's been going since 2007, and people from around the world I've received emails from saying, in India and Brazil and different places, and they're, Colombia, and they were just saying that they use it as a springboard to start democratic discussions and to try to push the envelope in ways that really make sense to them. So I think it's important work, and I think having a specific scope and having a place where things have been vetted in a certain sense is beneficial for people to come to it and say, okay, let's see what. So I think it depends how the editor chooses to approach the process. It could be a very adversarial one, or it could be more of a loving type of a process, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think editors have a lot of leeway in terms of what they can do, and they can certainly work with authors, not only in the peer review process, but even prior to it. Like sometimes if we see a piece that has a lot of, there's something there that we feel that it's really important that the person wants to say, then we can work during the, before it even goes out for peer review. But yeah, it's definitely a tension between all those, we do have several sections that are editorial reviewed rather than they don't go out for peer review. And so that's one way of addressing it. And that has its advantages as well as its drawbacks, depending on, what you want as an author. But for sure, there's a lot of pressure, increasingly so. I don't know about the other editors, for the rush, the rush to publish. How long will it take you? I recently had a question, if I submit to you, how long will it take, right? Whereas as I suggested in my presentation, as a journal, we have tried to slow things down, and try to engage more in conversations rather than just publish,
One note that came up in the feed was how to support racialized scholars.
I think that's an important question. How to support racialized scholars by the journals, by different journals. I think that's a good question that you folks might want to respond to. Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the comment, because I mean, we're all white in the panel at least, and I don't. Ashwani's on the board of other education now. I'm just trying to think. I think we have been desirous of making sure that we've got a diverse board, and I would be open to anybody who is not white to contact me and say, I want to do this work, I want to be part of your project, because it's really hard in academia, which is racist, to have the quantity of racialized scholars. I've never used that phrase, but I'll use it if it's a good one. The quantity where you can say, okay, here's somebody that can work in this area. I would love it that alternative education had more non-white scholars, but unfortunately that's not the case, and that's not because alternative education is inherently racist in any way. I'd say its credentials for being less racist than normal are pretty good, but unfortunately we're dealing with structures and systems which are which are inherently racist, and also, you know, it creates silos. And any project like a journal relies on contacts, it relies on networks, and if your network starts off white and you want to broaden that, you have to do work, and in order to do that work, you've got to be the kind of white male middle-class person who can stay in academia and, you know, and stick it. And if you have any difference of any kind, it's a struggle to be in academia in terms of hanging around to make the networks with people who aren't white male middle class, you know. So it's a really tricky one. I'll just say I'm very open. Gina's very open to diversifying other education as much as possible. We would love that, and anyone who is interested to be part of the project, please apply and state your case. And in your case, you know, please state, I'm not white. You get priority. We have enough white people around.
Ashwani, I just want to draw your attention. There is a question at the 2:27-minute mark in the chat by Ajit, and I don't know if you want to address it or not, but
yeah, no, please go ahead. I'm just here to listen and to enjoy. I've done my job for the day.
okay.
So yeah, please go ahead and respond. I think that's a very important question, and I think it's right up your alley. So please go ahead.
All right. So there's a difference between unschooling and homeschooling, and sometimes unschooling is seen as a branch of homeschooling. And when people homeschool, sometimes people try to replicate the school curriculum in their home. So they try to, you know, sometimes even create a classroom with an externally imposed curriculum, either a purchased one or, you know, one that's connected to a particular organization or so on. Whereas unschooling is different, right? And it's important to recognize and remember, from an unschooling perspective, you don't need to have teaching in order to have learning. Learning can happen in very different ways. You know, some of the meditative ways of learning can happen without having, you know, an externally imposed human being as a teacher. And so, you know, when you know, you talk about how parents don the mantra of a teacher is not necessarily the case. One way of thinking about it is, you know, when you think about teaching in itself, some people, you know, like the founder of the Circle School talks about, you can, you know, teaching could be like filling a bucket. You know, Paulo Freire talks about that as banking education, where you take information and you pour it into somebody's mind. you know, and it's like filling a bucket. That's one example or metaphor for learning. Another is lighting a fire. And so the teacher's job is to get the student excited about particular subjects or, that kind of thing. So both of those are still very much teacher-centered. But there's also another model, which is about fanning a flame. And that's kind of the unschooling model, where you allow people to unfold in ways that make sense to them. And your job is just to be there, right? John Holt says, if somebody has a question and asks you a question, answer their question. Let's not play teaching games where you pretend, well, look it up or go to the dictionary. No, you know the answer. They're asking you, just give them the answer. And so that's within the unschooling community, the job of anybody who's there, right? You recognize that learning happens everywhere. It doesn't happen in the context only of a mainstream school system or, within four walls. Learning is what we do as human beings. And so, the parent doesn't take on the role as teacher. A parent is a parent, not a teacher. And, you could learn from your parent, but you could learn from my pet, or I could learn from a tree, or I could learn from a rock. You just learn as you live your life. And so I think it's important to sort of understand that unschooling and homeschooling, they share similarities sometimes, but they're not exactly the exact same things. Unschooling is more of a branch of homeschooling that's much more, open and democratic in a lot of ways, where the learner is empowered, right? So when you look at systems, you say, well, who's in control of the curriculum? Where is the power from a critical pedagogical perspective? Does it lie with the teacher? Does it lie with the principal? Does it lie with the school, the state? Where is the power? And unschooling says the power is not with the parent or the teacher or the school or whatever it is, but the power is with the learner. And the learner gets to decide and to unfold in whatever way that makes sense to them. I hope that helps clarify.
There is another related question. I think that we don't have that much time, but if somebody wants to respond to that question, I try to respond to that question all the time in my classrooms. But somebody is asking, what is the possibility of meditative inquiry, unschooling, and other holistic approaches in contexts such as medicine, engineering, science, and mathematics? Often people think that more humanities-oriented subject like literature and humanities allow more space for these kinds of inquiries, while the hard sciences don't. I don't agree with that, because I think the possibility of reflection and dialogue and inquiry exists everywhere. Whether we utilize that or not, that's a different matter. But anybody else would like to respond to that? What is the place of alternative approaches in the so-called hard sciences?
If I could just say and I won't take up time because I feel like I'm speaking too much, but my daughter's currently in medical school. She had a job at a bakery before she entered her medical school. This summer, we said to her, don't go back to the bakery. Let's find you a job related to your future profession. She worked at a pharmacy. She learned so much working at the pharmacy. And that's just natural, right? It's authentic learning. And I think sometimes people think that you need to, so if somebody wanted to become a medical doctor, I'd say, okay, well, this is what you need to do. Hang around with doctors, with nurses, in hospitals, anywhere, pharmacies, butcher shops, anywhere that you could learn about, what it means to be a medical professional. And that will give you a lot more than going to class. And my daughter goes to class and works from 7 a.m. to like 10 p.m., like a lot of medical students. And it's, this is why they have clinicals in those programs, right? Because they understand the importance of authentic learning, and that's unschooling.
Anybody else wants to say anything, any final thoughts, because we are getting close to concluding this session? Anything anybody would like to say?
Just because,
Go
oh,
ahead,
well,
please.
just because we're a generalist journal, sometimes we get, especially to our notes from the field, which is it's an editorial reviewed section. We do get people from medicine that are in medical education and cross a border and that do write in. And I think probably that's because they're looking for places to publish on, and just express themselves on this subject.
Yeah, I would say I'm certainly not the best spokesperson for IT and STEM disciplines, and it seems intuitively necessary that if one is going to be an original thinker, creative in what they're doing, original in the kind of research and insight that they're able to share in the world, they need to be inquiring, certainly thoughtfully. And meditative inquiry seems consistent. And of course, there are examples, Barbara McClintock famously in her work with corn said, "I know my corn plants intimately, and I find it a great pleasure to know them." Right. And then she went on to win the Nobel Prize. So, yeah. I would also just go back to say about diversity and equity and inclusion in our work. It's a real struggle. It's part of our journal's mission explicitly to increase diversity in the voices that are being represented in the journal's work. And our next issue, what would it be? Spring issue 23 is a themed one, guest edited by Wahinkape Topa, 4 Arrows, who some of you may know, on Indigenous scholarship and a kinship worldview. So as just one example of how we might continue to push towards more inclusion. And thank you, my colleagues and Ashwani. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I think, Ali, we should conclude the session here, right?
Yes,
So that
sounds
we
good.
can take a little bit of break before the next section. But thank you so much, Teresa and Paul and Laurel. I think Laurel got kicked out for some reason. And Carlo and Helen, thank you so much for taking the time and preparing your thoughtful remarks and sharing with us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
And I will say to the presenters, make sure you read through the chat in case you missed some messages that are directed at you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.